I want to take a moment and really thank Matt for this opportunity, but more broadly for the IC chats in general, because they're a very valuable insight and resource that a lot of young and emerging evaluators or new and emerging evaluators need in the field. And I was raving earlier as we began this call with Matt, because I mentioned about it last night when the New York Consortium of Evaluators, NICE, had a networking meeting and how people wanted to get involved in independent consulting, didn't know how, and they were asking about resources. And this has been a very tremendously a great resource, along with Ann Price's office hours, which I also participate in full disclosure, and I love all of those resources. So today's I'm Theoharis. I am the one of the faces now behind Theo Squared. We do research and evaluation, but we're very much focused on food systems, food security, sustainability, and youth. So that's sort of the reason I even wanted to become an evaluator, was because I wanted to look at food systems, and knowing that I didn't have the one silver bullet solution, but I knew other people who had a few solutions, to look and to find what is the best solution or the best outcome for each particular community, uh, and such. So what we're going to discuss today are capability statements. Um, and capability statements, okay, there we go. Sorry. Capability statements, first question is, do you need one? And I want us to really think about that, because I'm going to give an evaluative answer. It depends. Well, what does it depend on? It depends on if you're willing to work, or do you want to work with the federal, state, or local governments. But I would also challenge us to sort of broaden the scope, and also for our business, not to assume the federal, state, or local government very narrowly. So if you also work in the periphery of the government, in looking at neighborhood coalitions, for instance, in business improvement districts that often you get paid through by a system that would be administered by your local city. Or also, I want to add here the attorney general, the attorneys general in the United States. So often, money from large settlements like tobacco, for instance, end up being given for initiatives, and for different health programs, and you can be the evaluator on those programs. And they're not always narrowly focused either on health or alternative systems to justice and incarceration. I would also, for instance, talk about workforce development, because often companies who violate timekeeping pay settlements. Obviously, here in New York City, the Southern District is known for this. Those funds end up funding workforce programs. So you would need a capability statement on the periphery, looking at interventions, and when the funder is not necessarily the public sphere, but a quasi public private partnership, if you will. So this goes back to one of the central tenets that we've discussed very often on this chat. Who do you want to work with? So creating the work you want to work with, and that really means to target. And it before you even begin to do your capability statement, you really need to start targeting. So you don't want to bridge for the whole entire federal government. In fact, I would even say you don't even want to look at one particular agency in itself. You want to look at the whole entire apparatus. You want to start doing your homework. You want to follow the money. And I'm going to say this expression often here, and it's difficult to say because evaluators, what we want to do is assist the programs. We want the intervention to work. We often, when we put in bids, we want to get the project, and we're willing to lowball or to do things in terms of scope creep. But it is a dollars and cents. In terms of our research, it has to be to see who is funding it. Find out why the program exists. I was always impressed when I go to networking calls. For instance, when I took classes for the Evaluators Institute in DC, and I got to meet a lot of folks who work for the USDA. The first question that comes out of their mouth is not so much what kind of evaluation you do, or how can you be useful to my agency. It is, what's the law? What's the guidance? Why do you exist? Who funds this? What's the congressional appropriation for? And this is very important also as you begin to respond to RFAs or other announcements for proposals, really looking as to why your program, the one you want to evaluate, came into being. Who are its supporters? Who are its champions? Who are the founders, right? Funders, rather. So very generally speaking, what is this capability statement? Well, it's usually a 1 to 2 page document that I'm going to refer to as a targeted cover letter. So yes, you should have one ready to go with your prime bullet points in there, but you should leave space for your ancillary, your secondary bullet points to be targeted to the specific agency or government program you're willing to apply to and register for, right? It's also often referred to sort of as an augmented business card or a business card on steroids. But it should not be used as a business card. You really shouldn't be taking your capability statement everywhere you go and just tossing it out to people. Capability statements have a great deal of information. Some of it might be proprietary to your business. Some of it might include, for instance, your tax identification number. You don't really want that information floating out everywhere. So you want to give it to an agency or to a person that's responsible, and it needs it for their own evaluation of your proposal and your work. One of the things most capability statements have are a section that features core competencies, your differentiators, your past performance, your company information, and your relative codes, which I'll go into in some detail. Now, just because I say these are common features, there is no right or wrong way to incorporate them, which brings me to the next slide, which is a generic template of a capability statement, which you can pull off the web. And this is sort of a how-to and what the government basically suggests, also from the Small Business Administration and Bureau, what you should have on your capability statement. And I want to pause here for a second and say the following things. Just because this template has the title on top, the company data on the bottom left, your codes on the bottom right, doesn't mean you have to follow this format. Evaluators are great at data visualization and creating very useful infographics. So you could mix and match, move things around. But these components and these elements are what the federal contractor, and more importantly, the office administrator who's putting together the packages, what they need to know um, if you can do the certain function. And if you're ready to go to the next step where they will take it to the commission or to the board that will look at all the requests for the answers to the request for proposals and judge and score your proposal. So this is sort of that cover letter. Do you meet the criteria? If it's a yes, you go ahead. If no, you will get rejected. Now, certain things about the document itself for capability statement. It is often federal agencies will request that this document is a PDF, not a Word, not a PowerPoint slide, but it has to be a PDF. Make sure the PDF, when you open it up, it opens up the same way on a Mac and a PC. Federal government often uses a PC Windows based. You want to make sure you have the correct version of Adobe and that there are no formatting errors that will cost you in terms of your capability statement. You also want to make sure your capability statement is readable by artificial intelligence, which will probably in most situations be the first pair of eyes or the first algorithm that's going to look at your statement and say if it's a yay or a nay. Something that came up for me last week when we were responding to a proposal and we were discussing a needs assessment, and I had the abbreviation for key informant interviews, KII, and somebody that I was working with who has experience evaluating grants with the federal government told me you got to be careful about that because often that KI, key informant interviews, comes up as kill, and the algorithm might flag it under different fonts. Something I totally didn't think about, but it was useful intel. Try to keep the font simple. So again, we're very big on data visualization, looking at font galleries. Try to use a standard font that most computers will read, Times Roman, something very simple. Follow the instructions. Any one of us who's worked with grants.gov or through other federal agency portals knows that if they tell you, if the federal government says, please label your statement as capability statement, label and name your file exactly the way the guideline says to name your file. Is it necessarily important? And will they take points off? No. But as in survey design, you have a certain amount of goodwill at the beginning, like a video game. You don't want to take your goodwill down by making such errors in the beginning. You rather make those errors later on, right? So, key takeaways here from just looking at this: the components for capability statement don't have to follow this sort of mapping. They don't have to be at the proper position on the page, limiting to 1 to 2 pages only if necessary. Yes, add some color and graphic elements. I'll show examples of them later on in the deck, how you can do that, but make sure your codes and relevant information is there. And the file usually saved in a PDF format as minimal data storage as possible so that it can be transmitted and viewed via email or other scanning devices through AI, right? Okay, onwards. Okay, core competencies, the first section. So what are these core competencies? What are you known for, right? So first off the bat, what you really need to hone in, your mission statement, your values, what makes you the best evaluator, you having the best team to respond to this RFA or to this request for proposal, right? It's your first introduction. What do you excel at? What are you really, really good at where your work could be advertised, where you do feature that on your website, okay? Now, examine the RFA, examine the RFP, and really look at what the commissioner, the funder of this evaluation needs. Not what they want, what the repetition, what do they say under their criteria on multiple pages that they really want out of this evaluation. You really should include how you're going to answer that question primarily. The, sec- the second thing you should look at is look at what the funder wants. For instance, often in USDA NIFA grants, this phrase keeps on repeating itself: innovative uses of qualitative and quantitative data. Okay, so obviously they're calling for mixed methods evaluation. Now, how, to what degree, what you consider to be innovative is also to what the funder requests to be innovative is a different degree. So you want to mention some things, for instance, that you are known for that are innovative. If you're doing, let's say, social network analysis, that's a hot topic. If you know how to do dashboards, you can create custom portals. That's an interesting thing. If you know how to use QGIS or ArcGIS and you want to mention that in terms of geospatial coding, mention that. But that's sort of the innovative aspect. That's the bells on the whistle, the cherry on the cake or the sundae. You really want the main part of your core capabilities to address what you're really good at and what anyone will vouch for you about, right? In a hard spin. So looking at some of the other sections, past performance, your previous contracts, and similar contracts that you've had, referencing them, and also talk about the agencies you worked well in the past, and the agencies or government offices that you want to work with in the future. Here you would mention if you're, let's say, applying for a grant which you've never worked for in the past, or a contract, but you've done something similar, this is where you want to talk about that. And you want to say how you and your or evaluation firm can answer the RFA and provide insights. Differentiators, really, what sets you apart? What are your strategic advantages? And sometimes strategic advantages could be the fact that you're local to an area. Sometimes a strategic advantage, and I often see this in community programs, is the fact that you have, let's say, a licensed social worker, that you know how to, you have a trauma informed practice, and that you understand how to work with communities, right, that have been impacted, and your outreach is such. So this is a differentiator some agencies are looking for. What is your unique value proposition? What can you bring to the table that's not going to be a plain old report that might go on someone's shelf and not read? What can you give in terms of bells and whistles? And how can you position yourself so even if you don't get this particular evaluation contract, you want to be put on a list where you get a call back for other things down the road, right? Also talk about your team or standing agreement. So if you're willing to be a subcontractor, talk about that. If you put teams together ad hoc for each evaluation, and that is your differentiator, talk about that. And of course, take always consult and get consent from everyone involved. But if teamwork is a big part of what you do, mention it and as any differentiator. Um, and differentiators are context specific. So this is where you want to look at that particular RFA, list maybe 2 out of 3 of your bullet points, the area you want to put on the document, be those that are static and are not going to change, but you're following bullet points. After that, you might change them depending on the particular RFA or RFP you're going to respond to. Okay. All right. So company information. This is relevant information about your company, your values, your mission statement, maybe your graphic and your logo, depending on the space. And also here, when we talk about graphics, not too many colors, 2 to 3 colors, consistently used. They won't take away from your bullet points. Mention a website, or I'm mentioning here a particular landing page that has information for each specific agency. And this is something that recently came into my attention where you can have your website, you can create search engine optimization for it. You have a lot of the public facing aspect of your website, but you could create a specific page that you really want that agency to go there first. And there you will see specific information about your past performance, where you will highlight people you've worked with on similar grants, and really pictures and other elements that you cannot necessarily have on your one pager for your capability statement. But again, a more of an expansive, interactive, maybe even using a storyboard aspect that will show the agency digging in for more information, how you are best suited to customize. And this web page may or not be SEO optimized, and it's something that's not necessarily going to be private, but not something you're going to advertise to everyone, because you want to have a few of those depending on the agency you want to look at, right? Codes and stuff. And this is where I get a lot of sort of the questions. You're going to have a DUNS number. All right. A DUNS number is basically a number you're going to get from, currently is changing from Duns and Broad Street, I believe, is the firm, which is basically your credit file as a small company and your credit worthiness. And it's a number you need if you're going to apply for grants or contracts with the federal government. And we'll talk about how to do that in the next step, right? If you do see the slide, by the way, you can click on some of this and we'll take you to the website to sign up. What I want to focus here and say that all these codes, all this signing up is free. Yes, there exist different companies that are for profit who may offer you a strategic advantage or may offer you to do all this legwork, signing up for codes, listing you on websites to get paid, different government agencies, different state agencies. But all of this fundamentally is free. So you can do it yourself and you can research and not have to pay for anyone to do it. I don't want to necessarily call these folks scam artists, but it is often when they approach you, they will make it seem that their services are indeed not only invaluable, but are required. That is not the case. A cage code is a special identifier that's a combination of letters and numbers. It usually is pertinent to the DoD, but not only in terms of how you're going to get paid and where you're allocated. NAICS codes are codes that have to do with commodity. And I know evaluators often don't want to consider what they do as a commodity. It's not like we're selling light bulbs. It's not like we're selling cars. But for all intended purposes, for the person plugging in this information and doing the data collection in terms of where dollars are spent, evaluation is a commodity. It's a commodity, though, and this is where it gets tricky, that does not fit well into one rubric or one box. So these codes do change, and I'm going to give a few examples of them, how they can be specific. Also, if you're not So the NIACS codes are available from the Census Bureau. They're really a federal standard of of classification of industry, right? And they're often used to a great degree across the U.S. But, and here's where I'm going to give some exceptions. Find out if your local city government may not use them. So New York City, for instance, uses another classification system called NIGP codes. Again, this is something we've discussed often in these talks. Reach out to your small business administration, reach out to the Procurement Technical Advisory Council, the PTAC groups, and ask for these codes. And in particular, ask about, a little segue here, what else you need to do once you have your capability statement. If you need to register on certain websites. And here, for instance, something I found out for New York City, New York City has a very high threshold. It's about $500,000 actually, where an evaluation contract can be given to somebody without a bid. Okay. And we can discuss if this is good or bad governance. That's a whole entire different cookie to crack. But you might ask, well, if an RFA and RFP is not going to go out, how are they going to know that I exist? And one of the ways they're going to know that you exist is by registering within the, for instance, I'm going to use New York City as an example. The New York City portal system, it's called Passport. You will have your relevant codes. You will have your capability statement, and depending on who you work with, the PTAC, a certain other documentation may be needed in terms of your relevant work. But you will then start to sort of network with agencies where you're put on lists, and you're basically going to be called up from the pre-procurement process of sources sought, and try to get that going. And to look at what you would do for an evaluation. Not necessarily, you might get a phone call, not an actual document in terms of a request, but some ideas, and you're put on a short list. So you want to be on those short lists so you can get the tap on the shoulder if the contract is coming down. And I'll talk a little bit later about how the procurement process works, and more specifically in the New York City context, but also for the federal government. Now, if you're doing development work and you're working in international development, you want to use the UNSPSC codes, which I'll give examples that are relevant to how the UN system and other intergovernmental organizations that work around the globe contract out. A lot of resources are available on the on various UN websites, but also on DevEx and things like that. So you want to list as many codes as possible so you give yourself a great scope, but you don't really want to overdo it. You don't want to give someone a column of codes without explaining what they're relevant. Okay, so as I said, DUNS are free. That is a website you can click and go to. A CAGE code you will get from SAM. SAM is a simplified award management system for the US government. So currently this is under, it's changing, but the original SAM is where you would register your DUNS number to get a SAM account. If you want to do research into previous contracts and who's getting the money, and following the paper trail of these contracts, you would go to betasam.gov, and there you will see sort of the paper trail. And again, this is, why do I say do your homework? You may still be starting out. I am, at least. You want to be considered for subcontract, and you want to start cold calling people who've gotten these contracts and saying, hey, how can I help? So if you need your codes, and I'll give some examples, you can go to the website. Some codes that are often used for evaluator specific are the ones for general management consulting services. Other management consulting services is often used. And my favorite that's not often used, but I think it should be used more in evaluation, is research and development, the social sciences and humanities, which really to me sounds like evaluation, right? If you're doing development work, I have a link here. You can go to the UN Marketplace. So specific to some of the work I do, which is food-based, these are the codes for nutrition project evaluation, for evaluation of food and nutritious impact, and the general one for project monitoring evaluation. So if you are applying for a grant or talking with someone through the UN system, this is what you would need to do there, right? Now, so let's look at some examples of capability statement, right? I don't want to take too much of your time. I pull one off the web. This is a generic one. The reason I wanted to show this was it covers all the tenets of a capability statement that we talked about earlier. There is color used in it. There are graphics, right? You can differentiate on one side where the relative codes are, and you see it's a different color than where the bullet points are. Uh, the DUNS number and the cage code are listed right under capability statement where the I goes. And often enough, when you do apply past the AI level, the first thing someone is going to do before your evaluation proposal even goes to committee is to see if you're legit, if your DUNS number checks out and your cage code checks out. Another thing, I am wary about doing this, and I have not done it on my capability statement unless I know where it's going. I don't include my tax identification number. That is specific once I know who is getting my capability statement, then I'll add it. But one of the things I know for a fact, New York City agencies will ask you, and this is where you should talk with your CPA or your lawyer to make sure you're in good standing and you're registered. And if there are other sort of bells and whistles that are needed to be completed, like something from Better Credit Bureau or small business that basically say you're not a scam artist and that you have some work with nonprofits. If you're not if you're, let's say, on the Attorney General's list of New York as somebody who works with nonprofits, things like that would add to your legitimacy, right? Now, contact information, which is important. It is the one person or the one dedicated person you have in your agencies. And often for us, since we're lots of sole proprietors, single member LLCs, it's the same person behind the company. Who do you reach out to for more information, right? Different federal certifications are also listed where the codes are. And let's talk a little bit about the federal certification process. So again, to be certified is a free process. Okay. You don't have to pay. You don't have to go to scam artists. In fact, there is a very much an incentive from the Small Business Administration, when you look with your Small Business Administration offices, to get as many firms certified as possible. So if you're a woman-owned minority company, go ahead, ask to begin the certification process. They will assist you and they will guide you. Why do you want to do this now? In certain situations, there are set asides put for funding requirements where a subcontractor, a national subcontractor, prime, contractor, is doing an evaluation project, and they happen to have a site or need data collection from the city you're in. And part of their process or their narrative towards the government was that they were going to try to use as many certified small businesses in the process. So you want to indicate to the prime that you're ready to work, that you are certified, and that you're willing to take on this, the data collection, let's say, or some data analysis, or whatever the case may be, for your city, for your locality, and your state. And that adds for your prime, so they can basically check off and say, yes, we are indeed subcontracting to small businesses, to women-owned businesses, to minority-owned women, minority-owned businesses, etc. And again, these are free services, and in many cases, it is a self-certification process through the Small Business Administration. But taking advantage of the CARES Act and the fact that a lot of the folks who do small business advising, who work on procurement aspects, either both in the city and state level, they are really, really helpful, and they want to help you. They'll take this challenge on their own, right? Here is another capability statement. This is sort of my capability statement. And please, we can use this as a basis of discussion, but feel free to criticize it, take anyone's input on it. I try to follow the same components, a little bit of graphics, something that could be viewed in black and white if it gets printed out, not as heavy for the eyes. A question I got last time when I presented this had to do about accepting credit cards and PayPal. So often or not, you might get a question once you're on the short list and you're getting contracts where there's a couple of $1,000 where somebody needs you to clean up a data set, let's say, or somebody, or the mayor's office, for example, they want a focus group. They want two focus groups about an issue. They want to do it on the down low. It's not going to go in on an RFP or something big. And this is really where it's useful, where you get the call and uh, the person can basically pay you using credit card. It is also useful for people who deal with the federal government to understand the deadlines and how the budget process works for the federal government. Currently, because of COVID, this is not the case. Any funds that are not used per quarter are usually um, put in to cover deficits and to cover emergency COVID relief on city and state level. Most governments, local governments, are running a little bit into the deficit area. But in other years, if there is money left over on the evaluation line, and this is an old age adage for whoever works with the federal government, it's use it or lose it. So if there's a couple of $1,000s left on an evaluation line, you might get the person who hands out the contracts gives you a call and says, look, can you do a follow up on what you did 2 years ago, for instance? And we're going to pay X amount of dollars, and I'll bill it to you right now because I need to process it before the 31st, or things like that. So that's why being able to accept credit cards and PayPal is a good thing. Um, but having said that, another way to make sure you're on the list of contractors and willing to work is to make sure you have a profile on the integrated whatever system city or state government uses to pay you, right? So you want to be registered on that and have everything done in due diligence. That's also a flag to somebody browsing and who needs evaluation services to see, oh, there is somebody who does evaluation services on a particular zip code. Um, and these things do get tracked. And there is a, and especially if um, the program you're evaluating is linked to a discretionary line item for a particular person, right? So you want to, so you have a capability statement, right? What do you do next? You're going to search for those RFPs and those RFAs. You're going to get registered for those databases and is evaluated. Again, this is all free. You're going to start going. You're going to start going to contract conferences and make friends. Um, these are public Zoom calls right now. My guess is they might actually continue to be done on Zoom in the future where legal precedent allows, and you can be part of that conversation, ask questions, make it known that you want to be a subcontractor. Look at the procurement plans for agencies, right? In New York City, every agency has their procurement plans, and they think about evaluation and what they want to do in terms of evaluation way, way before the contract comes out or the RFP. You want to be part of that pipeline. You want to see when it's coming. And they, by law, at least in New York City and in New York State, the agencies will tell you when and what quarter they're going to think about an evaluation component, right? Um, I hope I didn't take too much time. I'm definitely available for questions, and I definitely want to hear from everyone else how their capability statements have fared for them, what kind of feedback they've received from funders, from the technical assistant groups, et cetera, in terms of, and their scorecard, if you will, and things of that nature.